You ever see a number so crazy that your brain just refuses to process it? Like it has to be fake, like somebody edited it for clout. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening right now, because reports are starting to circulate online claiming that Tay-K has allegedly seen a release date that doesn't even feel real. We're talking about the year 2099, not 2030, not 2040, 2099. And the internet is losing its mind trying to figure out if this is actually possible or just another viral exaggeration that got out of control. But here's where things get even more intense, because according to multiple social media posts and reaction clips, people are claiming that Tay-K himself has reacted to this number, and the way he allegedly responded has fans completely shaken. Some say he went quiet, others are claiming he said words that hit way deeper than anyone expected. And now everybody is asking the same question: what really happened when he saw that date? Because think about it, this isn't just some random statistic being thrown around online. This is a number that represents an entire lifetime, a future that suddenly looks completely different. And if these reports are even close to true, then what we're looking at isn't just another update. This could be the moment everything finally hit him for real. Fans are shocked, emotions are running high, and the internet is completely divided. Some people are calling it karma, others are saying it's heartbreaking. And then there are those who believe we're not even getting the full story yet, that there's something deeper going on behind the scenes that nobody is talking about. And just when you think this situation couldn't get any more intense, new claims start surfacing about what allegedly happened right after that reaction. Conversations, tensions, even people close to him reportedly stepping in. And now the story is taking a turn nobody saw coming. So the real question is, did Tay-K actually react this way? And if he did, what happened next might change how you see this entire situation forever. Reports started spreading late at night, the kind of posts that make people stop scrolling and read twice just to make sure they did not misunderstand what they were seeing. One account claimed that Tay-K had allegedly been shown a release year so far away that the room reportedly went cold the second it was said out loud. Another page reposted the same claim with dramatic captions, saying this was the exact moment reality finally hit him. Within minutes, reaction channels were already stitching together clips, fan pages were throwing up black and white edits, and comment sections were filling up with people arguing over whether this was an actual update or just another wave of exaggerated prison gossip getting turned into entertainment. But what really pushed the story into overdrive was not just the number itself, it was the alleged reaction attached to it. Because according to the reports making rounds, the first thing people close to the situation noticed was not anger, not shouting, not some dramatic outburst like the internet expected. It was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, the kind that makes everyone in the room start watching each other instead of talking. And if the reports are even halfway true, that silence lasted longer than anyone was comfortable with. One source claimed he allegedly stared at the paperwork for several seconds without saying a word, like his brain was trying to reject what his eyes were seeing. Another person online said it looked like he thought someone was playing with him, like this had to be a joke that would get corrected in the next 5 seconds. But according to the way the story is being told, no correction came. No one laughed. No one stepped in to say there had been a mistake. The date stayed exactly where it was, and the room reportedly had to sit there with it. And that is where people say the mood shifted from confusion to something much darker. Because once a rumor like this starts taking shape, everybody around it begins reacting in their own way. Some allegedly tried to keep things calm. Some reportedly avoided eye contact completely. And a few people, if these reports are to be believed, already knew this conversation was coming and had been dreading it for days. That is what makes this whole thing feel bigger than just another viral update. It's not being framed online as a simple prison number. People are talking about it like it was a personal collapse caught in slow motion. Fans are shocked because the version of him they have always held on to is frozen in a very specific image. For a lot of people, he still exists in that loud, reckless, untouchable energy that made the internet obsess over him in the first place. That image doesn't line up with a story about someone allegedly sitting in silence, staring at a date that makes the rest of his life feel smaller all at once. And that contrast is exactly why this
story is exploding. People are not just reacting to the rumor, they are reacting to the gap between the myth and the man. One fan account posted, "If this report is real, then this is the first time I actually felt how serious it all is." Another person replied, "Y'all treated this like a movie for years. Now everybody acting shocked because the ending looks ugly." And that is where the internet really started splitting in half. One side immediately turned emotional, saying this was heartbreaking, that no one should have to process a future like that at such a young age. The other side had no patience for that tone at all. They were blunt, cold even, saying the sympathy online only shows up when the consequences finally become impossible to ignore. Emotions ran high for a reason, because the rumor did not stop at the date, it kept growing. More pages began claiming that after seeing the number, he allegedly asked for the paper again just to look at it a second time. One report said he leaned back and shook his head slowly. Another claimed he whispered something under his breath that the people nearby could not fully make out. And of course, the internet immediately filled that silence with its own scripts. Some people insisted he allegedly said, "This cannot be real." Others claimed he said nothing at all, and that fans were simply putting dramatic words into a moment they were never there to witness. That is how these stories work. They start with one detail, then every person online adds a layer to it until the whole thing begins to feel like a scene everybody somehow remembers, even if no one can verify it the same way. But whether every detail is true or not, the effect has already landed. Because now the conversation is not about whether Tay-K is trending. It is about what it means when a life that once looked chaotic but open-ended suddenly starts being talked about like it has already been measured all the way to the end. And if you think the outside reaction was intense, the reports about what allegedly happened around him are even messier. Because according to multiple commentary pages, once that first wave of disbelief passed, people close to the situation allegedly began reacting in completely different ways. One person reportedly tried to keep the mood light and said something like, "That does not always mean what people think it means." But according to the way the story is being told, that line did not help. If anything, it allegedly made the atmosphere worse, because it sounded too polished, too rehearsed, too much like something people say when they know there is no comforting version of the truth available. Another source claimed someone else in the room allegedly cut in and said, "Nah, let him sit with it." And if that actually happened, that line alone explains why this story is catching fire, because it turns the whole thing into something painfully human. Not a legal update, not a technical discussion, just a moment where everyone involved allegedly realized there was no easy spin left, no more bravado to hide behind, no more fantasy language, just a number that landed like a weight and stayed there. The family was left divided, at least according to the way social media is now framing it. Some people online are saying that those close to him are still holding on to the idea that there could be changes, appeals, or future developments that shift the timeline. Others are being portrayed as much harsher, believing that this is exactly the kind of reality he should have expected all along. And once family tension gets added to a story like this, the audience always leans in harder. Because now it is not just one person dealing with the fallout, it becomes a whole emotional ecosystem. Everybody connected to the name suddenly starts carrying a version of the weight. That is also where fans start projecting their own emotions into the story. Because when they hear the family was left divided, they immediately imagine the arguments, the long pauses, the quiet disappointment, the blame getting passed around from one person to another. Who should have stepped in earlier? Who saw this coming? Who tried to help? Who gave up? Whether any of that happened exactly the way people are imagining it almost stops mattering once the rumor takes on enough emotional detail to feel real. And while all of this was spreading, another part of the story started getting people even more locked in. Some reaction pages began suggesting that this alleged moment was not just about the date. They claimed it triggered something bigger in him, that seeing it supposedly forced him to start looking at his life differently than before. Now again, to be clear, that is what is being reported and discussed online, but the way these channels are framing it is dramatic. They are saying this was not just shock. This was the first crack in a mindset that had allegedly stayed untouched for years. One commentator even said, "This
might be the first time the fantasy died in real time." And that line spread fast because people instantly understood what it meant. For years, everything around his story has been consumed through myth, image, music, controversy, and internet legend. But a date like that strips all of that away. It is not cinematic. It is not cool. It is not rebellious. It is not the kind of thing fans can turn into a caption and forget about. It just sits there and forces people to do math they do not want to do. That is why so many people are saying this moment allegedly changed the energy around him completely. Because before, the story always had some movement to it, some chaos, some unpredictability, some illusion that the next chapter could still turn in any direction. But according to the rumors now flooding social media, this was the moment that illusion got hit head-on by something colder than hype, something that doesn't care about image, something that makes even the people closest to you stop and realize there may be no dramatic escape scene coming after all. And that is exactly why the next part of this story gets even uglier, because once the initial shock wore off, the conversation around him allegedly stopped being about the number alone and started becoming about blame. And once blame enters a room, everything changes. The silence doesn't stay silent for long. According to the way these reports are being told online, the atmosphere allegedly shifted from shock into tension almost immediately after that first stunned reaction. Not because anyone wanted a confrontation, but because a moment like that has a way of dragging every buried feeling to the surface. The people around you stop thinking about what sounds kind and start reacting from whatever they have been holding in for years. One commentary page claimed that after staring at the date for a while, he allegedly leaned back and said, "So this is really what y'all think my life is now?" And if that line is even close to what was said, it explains why the energy around the situation reportedly turned so heavy so fast. Because that's not just somebody reacting to paperwork, that's somebody reacting to what the paperwork represents. A future that suddenly feels boxed in. A version of life reduced to numbers, routines, and time being counted in chunks instead of lived in moments. Another source claimed someone close to the situation tried to answer carefully, telling him this was not about what anyone thought, but about what was being reported and what was showing up in the system. But apparently that didn't land well, because according to the same rumor trail, he allegedly snapped back with something along the lines of, "Nah, don't do that con voice now." And the second a story includes a line like that, the internet grabs onto it and runs. Suddenly, everyone starts imagining the exact facial expressions, the body language, the side glances, the pressure in the room, and just like that, a rumor becomes a scene. Fans are shocked because this is the part of the story that makes everything feel personal. It's one thing to hear that somebody allegedly reacted badly to bad news. It's another thing entirely to picture the moment people around him had to stop pretending and face the emotional wreckage with him in real time. That's the stuff audiences latch onto. Not the technical update, not the legal language, the human tension, the disappointment, the way truth hits harder when there's nowhere left to perform. And the reports didn't stop there, because some pages began claiming that this was the moment old frustrations started spilling out. Not in some dramatic screaming match, at least not according to most of the versions flitting around, but in a much more uncomfortable way. Little comments, sharp replies, the kind of words that are not loud but still cut. One source alleged that someone in the room reportedly said, "You acted like time was a joke." And if that line was actually said, you already know it would have landed like a punch. Because that's what this whole thing is really doing to people. It's forcing them to look at time differently, not as hype, not as momentum, not as a phase, but as something brutally literal. Days, years, decades. And if someone actually said that to him in that moment, then the alleged reaction afterward becomes even more interesting. Because according to one account, he didn't fire back right away. He just sat there, jaw tight, eyes low, breathing heavier than before. And then reportedly he said, "Y'all only say this now because it's ugly." That line spread like wildfire online, because whether it happened exactly that way or not, it sounds like the kind of thing people believe. It fits too neatly into the emotional shape of the story, and the internet loves a line that feels true enough to repeat. One side started using it as proof that he allegedly feels abandoned now that the consequences have become too
visible to romanticize. The other side saw it as manipulation, as if he was trying to redirect the weight of the moment onto the people around him instead of fully owning it. Emotions ran high because every reaction to this story says more about the audience than people realize. Some viewers are hearing pain, others are hearing excuses. Some hear regret, others hear denial. And that is why the discourse has gotten so intense, because nobody is just reacting to a rumor anymore. They are reacting to what they think a person deserves to feel when reality finally catches up. And then the family angle got even messier. More pages started posting that the people around him allegedly were not on the same page at all about how to handle this moment. One side reportedly wanted to protect his mental state, saying there was no point piling on emotionally when the weight of the news was already enough. Another side allegedly believed the opposite, that this was exactly the kind of brutal clarity he should not be shielded from anymore. The family was left divided, and once that phrase starts floating around a story like this, the audience fills in the rest automatically. People online began imagining phone calls, tense conversations, long pauses, somebody crying in another room, somebody else leaving early because they could not take the atmosphere anymore. And maybe some of that is projection, but that is the power of stories like this. Once they start feeling emotionally detailed, people stop consuming them like information and start experiencing them like memory. One reaction clip that went viral claimed a relative allegedly said, "This is what happens when nobody can tell you no." That one line alone had people going crazy in the comments, because suddenly the narrative widened. It was not just about him anymore. Now people were dragging in everyone around him, the enablers, the people who hyped him up, the people who allegedly confused recklessness for charisma and let the myth grow until it became impossible to separate from reality. And when that conversation starts, nobody connected to the story gets to stay neutral. That is also where the fan base began splitting into smaller factions. Some people were still holding on to emotional loyalty, saying no matter what the internet says, watching someone allegedly confront a future like that is painful, period. Others were done with that framing completely. They were saying enough with the tragic genius energy, enough with the what could have been edits, enough with turning every dark development into some poetic lost story. To them, this was not a tragic collapse, it was a long overdue collision with consequences. But what really changed the tone of the whole thing was the rumor that after all of this, he allegedly asked to be left alone. Not dramatically, not with a speech, just a quiet request. According to one version of the story, he looked up and said, "Just give me a second." And for some reason, that simple line hit people harder than all the louder rumors combined, because it made the scene feel stripped down, smaller, sadder, less performative, less like internet drama, and more like somebody sitting in the middle of a future they do not know how to emotionally carry yet. And if the reports are accurate, that moment of wanting space did not calm things down. It actually made the people around him even more unsettled. Because when someone who is usually described as loud in energy or hard in posture suddenly goes inward, the people close to them notice immediately. They start wondering what is actually going on beneath the silence. Is it shock? Is it anger? Is it guilt? Is it fear? Or is it something even heavier than all of those combined? Some reaction channels even started suggesting that this alleged withdrawal is what really has people close to the situation worried, not the initial reaction, not the words, not even the date itself, but the idea that after all the noise, he may have allegedly gone emotionally quiet in a way that feels unfamiliar to the people who know him best. And once that theory started circulating, the entire story took on a different tone. It stopped feeling like a one-night reaction and started feeling like the beginning of a deeper internal unraveling. Which is exactly why the next wave of rumors hit even harder, because once people began saying he allegedly shut down after that moment, more claims started surfacing that what happened after was not just emotional. According to some of the loudest reports online, there was another conversation later that night that changed everything again. Later that same night, according to the reports now flying all over social media, the situation allegedly got even more intense behind the scenes, and this is where the story really starts sounding less like one shocking update and more like a full emotional collapse playing out in pieces, because the rumor is not just that he reacted once,
then went quiet. People are claiming there was a second conversation, one that happened after the room cleared out a little, when the noise died down and only a few people were left around him. And apparently, that is when things got personal in a way nobody in that space was prepared for. One source claimed that after sitting in silence for a while, he allegedly started asking questions that did not sound like legal questions at all. They sounded human. Things like, how old am I going to be? And what does that even look like? And that is exactly why this story is gripping so many people. Because those are not the words of someone performing for an audience. Those are the kinds of questions a person asks when the future stops being abstract and starts feeling painfully physical. Age, time, life passing in a way you can almost see. Fans are shocked because this is the kind of detail that changes the whole mood of the story. Before, people were reacting to the number like it was just another wild headline. But once the alleged reaction becomes about age and lost years, suddenly the whole thing feels heavier, more real, less memeable. Because when someone is reportedly trying to calculate how much of their life is being swallowed by a date, the room shifts, the audience shifts. Even the people who came into the story ready to joke about it start pausing a little longer than they expected. One commentary account even claimed that somebody near him allegedly tried to answer those questions and then stopped halfway through, like they realized there was no version of the truth they could say out loud without making the whole thing feel even darker. And if that actually happened, it would explain why the mood online changed overnight. Because people are no longer just talking about a prison update, they are talking about what it allegedly did to his mind the moment it landed. And then came the rumor that really sent the internet into full chaos. Several pages started claiming that at some point during that second conversation, he allegedly brought up the past in a way he never had before. Not publicly, not clearly, not in some full dramatic confession, just fragments, broken statements, the kind of things people say when they are trying to process something too heavy to put into a clean sentence. One page claimed he allegedly muttered, "It all moved too fast." Another claimed he said, "I thought I had more time." And whether those exact lines are true or not, the internet instantly treated them like gospel because they fit the emotional shape of the story too perfectly. Emotions ran high because if there is one thing audiences cannot resist, it is the possibility of regret finally surfacing in a story that has been fueled for years by image, defiance, and chaos. That is why people keep clicking, commenting, reposting, arguing, not because they know exactly what happened, but because they are trying to decode whether this is finally the moment the emotional armor allegedly cracked. But not everybody was buying the softer narrative, and this is where the story gets even messier. Because while some people online were reacting like this was a heartbreaking turning point, others started accusing the entire thing of being over-dramatized sympathy bait. One viral comment said, "The internet only wants him reflective now because the fantasy got old." Another wrote,
Everybody wants a redemption arc the second reality becomes too ugly to romanticize. And honestly, that kind of pushback is exactly why this topic has become so explosive, because no one is just consuming the rumor. Everyone is fighting over what it should mean. The family was left divided in the court of public opinion too, because once the alleged regret angle started gaining traction, people began debating whether those close to him should be encouraging that emotional shift or shutting it down. Some reaction pages claim there are people around him who allegedly think this is the first real sign that he is starting to mentally confront what his life looks like now. Others reportedly believe it is dangerous to read too much into one emotional moment and build a whole transformation narrative around it, and that is where another twist started picking up steam. According to a few online reports, there may have allegedly been tension between people close to him over how this moment should be handled moving forward. One source claimed someone said, "Do not let them turn this into content." And if that line was actually spoken, it would be one of the most revealing details of this entire story, because it shows an awareness of exactly what is happening in real time. The internet is not just reacting to a rumor, it is feeding on it, shaping it, stretching it, and building entire emotional universes around moments that may have started off private. That idea hit fans hard, because once you start looking at this story through that lens, everything gets
uncomfortable. Every repost feels invasive. Every reaction clip feels a little colder. Every dramatic caption starts looking less like commentary and more like scavenging. And yet, at the same time, people cannot stop watching, because this is what the internet does with pain. It packages it, argues over it, and then pretends the emotional mess was always about the conversation. Still, according to the reports, the emotional center of this whole situation kept circling back to one thing: time. Not image, not status, not old hype. Time. One source claimed that after hearing people around him talk, he allegedly went quiet again and just repeated the year under his breath, 2099. And apparently the way it was said made everyone around him visibly uncomfortable, because a year like that does not sound like a future. It sounds like distance, like disappearance, like life turning into something hard to emotionally picture. Fans are shocked because this is where the myth starts losing its grip. For years, a lot of people talked about his story in a way that felt larger than life, reckless, infamous, almost cinematic. But a scene like this, if even partly true, does the opposite. It shrinks everything down to a painfully ordinary human reaction: disbelief, silence, anger, confusion, and the terrifying realization that years are not just numbers until they are your years. And just when it seemed like the emotional storm had maybe peaked, another rumor started spreading that changed the tone again. Some pages began claiming that after all of this, there was allegedly one person who confronted him in a way nobody else had. Not softly, not carefully, directly. The rumor says this person told him something along the lines of, "This is the first time you're actually seeing what everybody else saw a long time ago." And if that conversation happened the way it is being described, then it probably landed harder than anything else said that night. Because that line is brutal. It suggests the tragedy is not just the date, it is the delay. The idea that reality may have been visible from the outside long before it became emotionally real on the inside. And if that is true, then this whole story stops being about one shocking update and starts becoming about the terrifying gap between how people live and when they finally understand what their life has become. According to the rumor trail, he allegedly did not respond right away to that comment, which honestly only made the story hit harder, because sometimes the loudest reaction is no reaction at all. Sometimes silence is not avoidance, it is impact. It is the moment a sentence actually lands deep enough that there is nothing quick or clever left to say. And if you think that was the end of the emotional fallout, it was not, because by the next day, another set of reports started circulating that suggested this alleged reaction did not just affect him, it reportedly changed the way the people around him were looking at him too, and that is where the story takes its sharpest turn yet. By the next day, the entire energy around the situation had allegedly shifted in a way people close to it could not ignore. Because according to the reports spreading online, the reaction was no longer being treated like a one-time emotional moment. People were starting to describe it as something that changed the atmosphere around him completely. And when a story moves from "he allegedly had a bad reaction" to "everyone around him started acting different after it," that is when audiences get locked in on a different level. One source claimed that people around him allegedly noticed it first in the way he carried himself. Not some huge dramatic change, not a movie scene, just small things: less talking, less pacing, longer pauses before answering basic questions. And if that sounds simple, that's exactly why it feels believable enough for the internet to run wild with. Because those are the kinds of details people attach to moments they think broke something open emotionally.
Fans are shocked because this is the kind of story detail that hits harder than yelling ever could. People expect anger, they expect outbursts, they expect some explosive scene they can clip and replay. But a quiet shift, a room full of people realizing somebody is not moving the same after hearing one number, that's the kind of thing that stays with people. That's the kind of thing fans start reading into, replaying in their minds, turning into full narratives. And that's exactly what happened online. Reaction pages started building whole theories around the alleged silence. Some said it looked like he was finally processing the long-term weight of everything in a way he had never allowed himself to before. Others said this was not growth or reflection at all, just emotional exhaustion finally showing up in visible form. And then there were the people who thought the silence meant something even darker, that it was
Not about acceptance, but about mentally checking out. Emotions ran high because every interpretation came with its own emotional agenda. Some people wanted to see a turning point, some wanted to see consequences, some wanted to see collapse, and all of them were projecting those expectations onto the same handful of rumored details. That is why the conversation got so heated, not because anyone knew exactly what happened, but because everyone was trying to claim the meaning of what they believed happened. Then came another twist that pushed the whole story even further. According to multiple pages, someone close to him allegedly tried to bring up future plans the next day. Not big dreams, not anything dramatic, just basic questions. How to stay mentally focused, what to work on, how to structure time. But according to the way the story is being told, that conversation reportedly did not go well. One source claimed he allegedly cut the person off and said, "Do not talk to me like I got choices." And if that line is even remotely true, it is one of the coldest details in the entire story. Because that one sentence flips the emotional lens completely. It takes the conversation out of the territory of hope and drops it straight into something heavier, something more trapped. And once that line started circulating, fans immediately split again. One side saw it as raw honesty, the first truly unfiltered sign of how he may allegedly be seeing his future now. The other side saw it as yet another example of somebody refusing to engage with the reality of rebuilding whatever version of life is still available. The family was left divided in an even more obvious way once those kinds of alleged exchanges started surfacing. Because if the reports are true, the people around him are not just worried about what this update means practically, they are worried about what it is doing emotionally. Some people reportedly believe this alleged reaction proves he needs support, structure, and a different mindset more than ever. Others are said to feel like everyone has already spent too many years cushioning him from the full emotional impact of his own situation. That divide allegedly got worse after another conversation started making rounds online. According to one page, a relative supposedly said something like, "Everybody wants to protect your feelings now, but nobody could protect the years." And if that line was actually spoken, it is one of those brutal truths that instantly takes over a story, because it cuts straight through every soft layer people have been trying to wrap around the situation. It is not about comfort, it is about time already gone. That quote spread fast because people understood exactly why it hurt. You cannot reverse years with sympathy. You cannot soften reality by changing your tone after the fact. And if that was said to him directly, then the emotional temperature in that room must have gone through the roof, even if nobody raised their voice. Because sometimes the sharpest moments are not loud, they are quiet and impossible to argue with. Fans are shocked because now the story is no longer just about one person's alleged reaction. It is about everybody around that person confronting what the reaction represents. Disappointment, helplessness, blame, fear, maybe even guilt. And once all of those emotions get stirred into the same room, every little interaction starts carrying way more weight than it should. That is also when the outside world allegedly started affecting the inside even more, because reports began claiming that people around him were aware of how fast the story was spreading online. They allegedly knew the reaction clips, fan edits, and dramatic posts were turning this private emotional moment into another public spectacle. And according to some of the pages covering it, that allegedly made the mood even worse. One source claimed someone said they already turned it into a storyline. And honestly, if that happened, it says everything. Because that is exactly what the internet does. It takes a moment of alleged human vulnerability and instantly stretches it into content. It assigns characters, heroes, villains, enablers, victims. Then it lets strangers fight over which version feels best to believe. And this story has all the ingredients people online cannot resist. Fame, downfall, regret, distance, family tension, and a future so far away it sounds unreal. But maybe the most chilling rumor of all is the one that started surfacing later that afternoon. Several pages began claiming that after all the conversations, all the reactions, all the emotional noise, he allegedly said almost nothing for hours. Just sat with it. Not withdrawn in a dramatic way, not acting out, just still. And people around him reportedly found that more unsettling than anything else that had happened. Because when somebody has always been associated with movement, noise, momentum, reaction, and heat,
stillness can feel terrifying. It can make everyone nearby start wondering what is really happening internally. Is this the beginning of acceptance? Or is it the moment a person emotionally detaches because the future suddenly feels too big to hold? That question is exactly why this story keeps growing, because nobody can answer it with certainty, and uncertainty is the internet's favorite fuel. Every pause becomes meaningful, every rumor gets stretched, every alleged sentence becomes a headline, and the more people talk, the less clear it gets where the actual moment ends and the mythology around it begins. Still, one thing is becoming harder and harder for even the most skeptical viewers to ignore. Whatever happened in that room, and whatever was really said, the reaction being reported has clearly changed the emotional framing around this entire story. Before, it was always about the headline, the controversy, the image. Now, according to the way this is all being discussed, it is about something far more uncomfortable. What happens when a person finally has to sit still long enough for the future to stop looking distant and start feeling permanent? And just when it seemed like the emotional fallout had settled into silence, a new rumor started circulating that completely changed the tone one more time. Because according to the latest claims, there was allegedly one final statement made after all of this that left everyone around him rattled. The statement that started making the loudest noise was not some dramatic speech, not a breakdown, not a public confession, and honestly, that is exactly why it hit people so hard. Because according to the latest wave of reports, after hours of tension, silence, side conversations, and people allegedly trying to figure out how to even talk around what had just happened, he supposedly said one sentence that made the whole room go still all over again. Just count the days. That was the phrase now being passed around by fan pages, reaction channels, and commentary accounts, like it was the emotional center of the entire story. And whether those exact words were ever said or not, they spread because they captured something people immediately understood. Not hope, not rage, not denial, just survival. The kind of mindset that strips life down to the smallest unit possible because thinking too far ahead suddenly feels unbearable. Fans are shocked because if the earlier rumors made this story feel dramatic, this line made it feel devastating. A lot of people could handle the headline version of this topic. They could argue over the number, debate the fairness, talk in circles about consequences and image, and all the usual internet noise. But just count the days is different. It doesn't sound like a storyline. It sounds like a person trying to mentally survive something too large to emotionally hold all at once. And once that phrase started circulating, the reaction online changed again. Suddenly the comments got quieter in tone, heavier in language. Some people said it was the first time the whole thing stopped feeling like a viral update and started feeling like an actual human situation. Others still pushed back hard, saying the internet was once again doing what it always does, building a tragic quote around a controversial figure, because pain makes for better content than accountability ever will. Emotions ran high, because both sides of that argument had enough emotional truth in them to keep the discourse ugly. And the uglier the discourse got, the more attention the story pulled. Some people were now saying this alleged moment marked the beginning of a total mental shift, that hearing a future reduced to a date, and then allegedly responding by reducing life to days, meant something had fundamentally changed inside him. Other people were not buying any transformation angle at all. To them, this was just another cycle of the internet trying to force meaning onto a story, because audiences always want pain to become poetry. The family was left divided in how people online imagined they would respond to, because once a line like that gets attached to a story, viewers instantly start building the next emotional layer themselves. Some imagined loved ones hearing that and feeling their hearts drop. Others imagined frustration, people thinking, no, you do not get to reduce everything to sadness now after years of chaos and damage. And that is what keeps this whole thing burning. It is not just the rumor, it is the emotional aftershock people keep building around it. Some commentary pages even claim that after allegedly saying that line, he reportedly shut down completely for the rest of the day. No more conversations, no more questions, no visible reaction. And if that happened, then it explains why so many people covering the story have started describing the whole situation less like a scandal and more like a collapse in slow motion. Because sometimes the loudest point
In a story is not the fight. It is the silence that comes after everyone realizes there is nothing left to say that can make the moment smaller. One reaction clip that got a lot of traction framed it in the most dramatic way possible, saying this was the moment the fantasy finally died. And as dramatic as that sounds, it spread because people instantly understood the emotional idea behind it. For years, so much of this entire story has been consumed through the language of myth, danger, controversy, and internet legend. But according to the way these new reports are framing things, all of that allegedly got stripped away the second the future stopped sounding like a rumor and started sounding like a clock. Fans are shocked because a clock is a very different thing than a headline. A headline can trend. A clock just keeps moving whether anyone is watching or not.
And that is why this whole topic has started hitting people differently, because it forces everyone, even people who have been detached from the story for years, to confront what time actually means when it stops being abstract and becomes the shape of someone's life. And maybe that is the darkest part of all of this. Not the number, not the reaction, not even the internet chaos. It is the idea that according to these reports, the moment that allegedly hit hardest was not some dramatic revelation about what happened in the past. It was a painfully ordinary realization about what comes next. Not glory, not escape, not another wild chapter, just time. Slow, repetitive, unglamorous time. That is why the internet has not been able to let this story go, because it is not just about one person anymore. It taps into something people understand on a much wider level. The terror of seeing your future reduced to something that feels too fixed. The emotional shock of realizing some things do not just work themselves out. The discomfort of watching a myth run headfirst into math. And once that emotional framing kicks over, the whole story changes. Suddenly, even the people who never cared before are paying attention. Suddenly, even those who claim they are tired of hearing about him are in the comments writing full paragraphs. Because stories like this force people to pick a side emotionally, whether they want to or not. Do you see tragedy? Do you see consequence? Do you see wasted potential? Do you see accountability finally catching up? Whatever answer people land on, they cannot seem to stop circling the question. That is what makes this topic so volatile. It is not clean. It does not resolve neatly. It does not give the audience a comfortable emotional lane to stay in. One minute it sounds heartbreaking. The next minute it sounds deserved. The next minute it sounds surreal. And then suddenly it just sounds sad in the most ordinary way possible. And that emotional instability is exactly what keeps people glued. So now the biggest thing people are arguing over is not whether reports are circulating. They clearly are. It's what these reports actually mean. Was this allegedly the first real crack in years of emotional armor? Was it just a temporary reaction to a number that looked impossible to mentally process? Or are people online, as usual, taking one private emotional moment and stretching it into an entire redemption or collapse narrative because that is easier to consume than uncertainty? Nobody seems to agree. And maybe that is the point. Because the messiest stories are always the ones that stay alive the longest. The ones where every detail feels just believable enough to repeat, but never fully stable enough to settle. And that is exactly where this one is sitting right now. According to the noise online, something allegedly shifted when that date was seen. Maybe in him, maybe in the people around him, maybe just in the way the public is choosing to frame the story now. But whatever actually happened, one thing is obvious. The conversation is no longer being driven by hype alone. It's being driven by something much heavier. The idea that one moment, one number, one reaction, and one sentence can suddenly make years of myth feel very small. And that is what has everybody watching now. Not because they know the whole truth, but because they can feel that something about the tone has changed. The bravado, the distance, the illusion. All of it suddenly feels thinner than it did before. And once a story reaches that point, people don't just watch for updates anymore. They watch because they're trying to figure out whether they just witnessed a turning point, or the moment everything finally became too real to look away from. And once a story starts feeling too real, that's when the outside world begins reacting like it's watching the end of one era and the beginning of something much darker. Because by this point, according to the reports and reaction clips flooding every platform, people were no longer just discussing an alleged prison update.
They were talking about a psychological turning point. A moment where a name that had spent years floating through internet culture like a symbol of chaos, rebellion, and unfinished legend was suddenly being spoken about in a completely different tone. One of the biggest shifts came from the fans themselves, not the casual viewers who only click when a headline gets dramatic, but the people who had followed every rumor, every repost, every old clip, every debate for years. Those people started posting in a way that felt almost uneasy, like they did not know how to hold the story anymore. Some were still trying to force the old energy back into it, posting lines about how real ones know and acting like nothing had changed. But a lot of others sounded different, more reflective, more uncomfortable, like the fantasy had finally become too heavy to keep dressing up as entertainment. Fans are shocked because what they are allegedly seeing now is not the version of this story they spent years replaying in their heads. For a long time, there was always this strange distance around everything. The music, the image, the controversy, the internet mythology of it all. People could talk about it like a cultural moment without sitting too long with what it actually meant. But now, according to the way these new reports are circulating, that distance is gone. And once it disappears, the whole thing starts looking harsher than people expected. One viral reaction post summed it up in a way that spread fast.
It said, "People loved the story when it looked dangerous. Now they hate looking at what dangerous actually costs." And honestly, that line stuck because it cut right through the fake coolness that used to hover over this topic. It forced people to confront something ugly, not in a preachy way, not in a dramatic courtroom speech type of way, but in a blunt human way. There is a huge difference between being entertained by recklessness and sitting with the reality that recklessness eventually turns into years, silence, distance, and emotional collapse. And that is why the outside commentary started getting sharper. Some people were now openly calling out the culture around the whole story, saying that for too long, too many people treated this entire situation like a soundtrack to internet nostalgia instead of a real-life cautionary tale. Others pushed back and said that was too easy, that people only get morally serious after the spectacle loses its shine. And that debate got intense fast because both sides were dragging years of built-up emotion into it. Emotions ran high not just because of the alleged reaction itself, but because of what it seemed to expose about everyone else. Fans, old supporters, critics, even people who had spent years casually reposting content tied to the name were suddenly being forced to ask themselves a weird question. What exactly had they been consuming all this time? A story? A downfall? A warning? A myth? And once a public conversation starts forcing people to examine their own role in why a narrative stayed alive, things get messy very quickly. That mess allegedly reached the people closest to him too, because according to several reports, the ripple effect from this whole reaction didn't just stay emotional. It reportedly changed how certain people around him started talking about the future entirely. One source claimed that after everything that had allegedly happened, somebody in his circle quietly said, "We can't keep talking to him like this is temporary." And if that line is even close to real, it's probably one of the most devastating details of this entire story. Because that sentence changes everything. It means the emotional framing around the situation may have shifted not just for him, but for the people around him too. For years, hope can survive in vague language. We'll see. Things can change. Just stay strong. But once a moment allegedly lands hard enough to make even the people around you stop using temporary language, that's when the mood turns from dramatic to devastating. The family was left divided in a deeper way because of that exact issue, not just over support or blame, but over what kind of language should even be used anymore. Some people, according to the online reports, allegedly still want to speak in terms of possibility. They want to keep every emotional door open. They want to believe that no matter how ugly the timeline looks, it's dangerous to let someone mentally sink into the idea that everything is already written. But others are reportedly on the complete opposite side now, saying false comfort is its own kind of cruelty, that pretending things are smaller than they are only delays the emotional crash. And that divide is where some of the heaviest alleged conversations are said to have happened. One reaction page claimed a family member allegedly said, "Hope is not the same thing as lying." That line hit hard because it captured the
exact emotional tension at the center of this whole situation. How do you keep someone mentally afloat without feeding them a fantasy? How do you tell someone to keep going without acting like the road ahead is something it is not? There are no easy answers there, and that is exactly why this story keeps gripping people. Because underneath all the headlines and dramatic edits, it is actually about a very human problem no one knows how to solve cleanly. And then there is the silence, the thing people keep coming back to. Because even after all the rumors, all the alleged lines, all the family tension, all the online debates, the detail that seems to haunt people the most is still the idea that after hearing this number and sitting through all of those conversations, he allegedly just went quiet in a way that felt different. Not dramatic silence, not angry silence, not leave me alone silence. Just a kind of stillness that made the people around him feel like they were suddenly looking at a person they did not fully recognize in that moment. Fans are shocked because stillness is scary when it comes from someone whose entire image was built around movement, heat, reaction, and noise. It is unsettling in a way that yelling is not. Yelling feels temporary. Stillness feels like something has settled, something has landed, something has changed. And maybe that's why the entire internet keeps circling the same emotional question over and over again. Was this allegedly the moment reality finally broke through? Because if it was, then the story everybody thought they knew has changed forever. It's no longer just about the old headlines, the old music, the old image, the old internet obsession with danger and controversy. Now it becomes about what happens after the mythology wears off and a human being is left alone with time. That's the word this whole thing keeps coming back to. Time. Not in a poetic way, not in some dramatic, fake, deep internet quote way, just in the most brutal, ordinary sense possible. Mornings, nights, years, birthdays,
silence, distance, repetition. The slow crawl of a future that no longer feels like a wide open road, but like something measured in routines and days and walls and long stretches of waiting. And once a story starts being framed through time instead of hype, the audience changes too. People stop watching for thrills and start watching because they feel something heavier than excitement. Maybe pity, maybe discomfort, maybe fear, maybe a weird kind of grief for a version of life that now feels permanently unreachable. And that emotional shift is what makes this topic so impossible for people to leave alone right now. Because whether every rumor is true, half true, or exaggerated beyond recognition, the reason this story has exploded is not complicated. It taps into something universal and ugly. The idea that there are moments in life when the consequences of everything do not arrive all at once in some cinematic explosion. They arrive quietly, on paper, in numbers, in silence, in the expression on someone's face when they finally understand how far away the rest of their life suddenly looks. And if that's what people are really reacting to here, then maybe that's why the internet feels so unsettled by it. Not because this is the wildest story they have ever heard, but because it is one of the few stories that forces them to stop pretending the distance between image and reality is always large enough to hide inside. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the gap closes in a single moment. Sometimes all it takes is one date, one room, one silence, and one sentence for the whole fantasy to collapse into something nobody can spin anymore. And that is exactly where this story is sitting now, suspended between rumor and reality, between spectacle and sadness, between the version people used to consume and the version they are now struggling to emotionally process. Which is why the biggest question is no longer whether reports are coming out. They clearly are. The real question is whether what allegedly happened in that moment was just a reaction, or the first time everything finally felt too real to escape. And that is exactly why this story has everybody talking right now. Because whether you believe every single report that is coming out or not, one thing is obvious. This whole situation has hit people in a very different way than before. What used to feel like internet noise, controversy, and old headlines is now being talked about like something much heavier, something that forced a lot of people to stop, think, and really ask themselves what this story actually means. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and the family was left divided. But the biggest thing hanging over all of this is still the same question. If these reports are true, was this really the moment everything finally hit him? Or is the internet once again taking one emotional detail and turning it into a whole bigger
narrative than it really is? Because let's be honest, stories like this never stay simple for long. Once the internet gets involved, every reaction becomes a headline, every silence becomes a theory, and every rumor starts growing faster than the facts. And that is exactly why people cannot stop watching, because no matter where you stand on it, this story leaves you with a lot to think about. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think really happened here? Do you think these reports about Tay-K's alleged reaction are believable? Or do you think social media is blowing this whole thing way out of proportion for clicks and drama? And if this really was a turning point, do you think it changes anything at all? Or is it simply too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I really want to know where you stand on this one. And if you enjoy these deep, dramatic, internet-breaking stories where we unpack every angle and every twist, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. And trust me, if you thought this story was wild, the next video on your screen right now is even crazier. So go click that right now and I will see you in the next one.